All right, good morning. This is Thursday. Wow, time flies. Thursday, January 25th, and this is the Senate Health and Welfare Committee meeting, and we're looking first taking a look at some testimony with regard to S-192. And before we do that, Katie, are you there? She is.
I am. Good morning.
Good morning. So before we dive into 192, can you give us just a thumbnail sketch of the bill, just really briefly, so
Sure.
we give us a reminder? Thank you.
S-192 is your bill on forensic facility. As you remember, when we walked through the bill, it's sort of divided in half. The first part of the bill mechanizes how individuals with a mental health condition procedurally could end up in a forensic facility. And similarly, the second half of the bill focuses on a population of individuals with intellectual disability. Again, the forensic facility, as drafted, would be for individuals with a criminal justice involvement and also being charged with a crime that indicates a high level of violence. So that is sort of the overview of S-192 at a very high level.
All right, thank you. And then when we've heard some testimony today, then we'll be looking at some other language that you're bringing to us.
I am going to review with you what House Judiciary was working on last spring. And I've also had a chance to sort of put a little outline of maybe a different way to structure the intellectual disability section if you're planning to move ahead with that section.
All right, thank you for that. That's very helpful. All right, so we'll move on to testimony, and then we'll try to sort this out. This is a bill that is important to both the judiciary and to mental health folks, and to the folks to Dale and folks with intellectual disability. So it is a very important bill, and we're hopefully our arms are stretching around it and getting to the end. Okay, so we have Karen Barber here from here. I'd like to hear any testimony that you each have, and then when we get to the end, we'll be asking broader questions, and we may get into some conversation. We'd just like to really understand the differences and the thoughts that folks have. So let's begin with Karen, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good morning. For the record, Karen Barber. I'm General Counsel for the Department of Mental Health. And I was planning on making a few general points, but then being available for questions, just because it did seem like last time the committee had a lot of questions. So I'll kind of go over my points and then happy to answer whatever questions. I first wanted to start with the big picture, which is kind of what you asked, Katie, but I think it's always helpful to ground us, which is, why are we here? What problem are we trying to solve? And what AHS is trying to deal with is gaps in the system. And we're trying to do so in a holistic way and not a siloed way. So not just DMH or Dale, but instead DMH and Dale working together to create a facility to address gaps in the system. DMH is lucky and that we do have a well-established system of care that allows individuals to move throughout the system to lower, less restrictive environments when they're ready. A requirement not just of this legislature and the statutes governing DMH, but also at the federal level. What DMH is missing, and has consistently been saying that we're missing, is a physically secure residential where we can place individuals who need a secure setting but don't meet hospital level of care. Along with that, we need a place where we can administer court-ordered medications and do episodic emergency and voluntary procedures. We testified at length about this need a few years ago when we sought permission to do this work at River Valley. We explained then, and continue to believe now, that there is a gap in our system at this level. At that time, the legislature made the policy decision to not allow us to do that there. So what does that mean? It means it limits who can go to River Valley, and the gap remains. There are individuals who don't meet hospital level of care either because they were stabilized in the hospital or never met that level of care, but still continue to need a secure setting where they can continue to receive treatment until they are ready to go back into the community. And we don't have that. We also have individuals who stabilize on court-ordered medication and then don't meet hospital level of care, but we know either through experience or their own words that they're likely not to continue those medications if they are discharged, which means they could start dysregulating and thus need hospitalization again in the future. And our goal is to always serve people in the least restrictive settings, which is why if we had a lower level of care where we could transition someone, continue to provide the treatment they need, and allow them extra time to stabilize while they work to transition into the community, that would be ideal.
Karen,
Yes.
Karen, so you're going through a lot of different individual patients and their needs and why they can or cannot be at River Valley. What would be very helpful is to slow down and give us each patient, do this over again. It's us, it's not you, because there's a lot of understanding in the room, but I want to be clear, I want to make sure that the committee is very clear on the different categories of patient that you're describing. So you can start over with the patients that would go to River Valley or not go to River Valley and explain it to us. And then those that would be receiving medication and would be out of River, we need to understand those categories or classes of patients.
Sure. So
Okay.
what the forensic facility would be for, right, are folks that are found incompetent or insane, and don't meet a hospital level of care. So it could be individuals that started in the hospital and then no longer meet that level of care, and we're looking to where to best serve them. Or it could be individuals who never met hospitalization criteria. So were never eligible to go to the hospital, but did need a secure setting. Medications are often a part of that. So we're talking about those individuals that either need to come out of the hospital and we need a place, an appropriate placement for them, or those that never were eligible for the hospital but continue to need a secure setting. Is that helpful?
Questions, committee questions on that? Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. So that's the pool of people we're talking about. And then right now, what we don't have is that level of care, right? So if they continue to need court-ordered medications, or they continue to need some episodic emergency and voluntary procedures while they continue to stabilize, that doesn't exist in our system. And so what we're trying to do is create a facility that would allow us to do that. We had initially thought about River Valley for doing that. It's a little different population, right? River Valley is not a forensic facility. It is, and it's only for people in DMH custody. But it's similar, and the reason I talk about it is because it's also the only it's the only physically secure residential we have, right? And so we envision the forensic facility being very similar, being licensed in the same sort of manner. And from DMH's perspective, it's the same admission criteria to go into this forensic facility, basically as it is to River Valley. So that's why I'm kind of talking about River Valley. It's easier for DMH to talk about this because we already kind of have this level of care. What we're asking for is additional options. Dale doesn't have something similar. Does that make sense?
Yes, loop back on that one more time, please.
Yes. So the way we envision, when you look at the statute, the changes in 192, when someone goes to River Valley now, they're on a special type of an order of non-hospitalization, which basically means that the department asks the court and says, we believe there's no less restrictive environment for these individuals to receive care. And the court has to make that finding. What we're doing for the forensic facility is the same, right? DMH has to go to the court and say, there's no least restrictive environment than this forensic facility for this person to receive care. They'd still be on an order of non-hospitalization, just like people at River Valley are, but instead of saying you can go to River Valley, it's saying you can go to the forensic facility. So DMH already pretty much has this system. And we're just adapting it to create a new level of care that doesn't exist, but we're not really talking about fundamentally changing our system. Dale doesn't have something similar, so their statutory changes look quite a bit different than ours, even though the goal is the same.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much so.
Okay. So that's what I just wanted to touch on overall is like, why are we here? What are we trying to do? And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create this new level of care that doesn't exist now. Again, for people who are incompetent or insane, who either don't meet hospital level of care but need a secure setting, or who never needed hospital level of care but do need a secure setting. And we need to be able to make sure we can clinically provide them appropriate treatment, which includes medications and may include emergency and voluntary procedures. One of the other things I wanted to touch on is, yeah.
We have a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Karen. So I'm not sure you're the right person to ask this. So if you're not, I'm happy to wait for another witness. But one of the things that's confusing to me about this is that we have two very different populations that we're trying to serve in one very small facility. I mean, it's like 6 beds, right? Or something like that. And it seems to me that the needs of the two populations are so very different that I don't understand why we would want to combine those two populations in the same facility, especially when they have different service needs, they have different, rehabilitation needs, and having them together in the same facility might actually be detrimental to one or the other's ability to get the care and the services that they need. So I'm wondering if if it wouldn't be better to separate this out, and since we're already down the line or down the path of being able to serve the population that has mental health needs, why don't we just focus on that and find a better solution for people with intellectual disability needs.
I might suggest, unless Karen, you want to weigh in on that hefty question.
Yes, I'm happy to weigh in.
Well, yeah, I'll let you do that, but the testimony, I think, will help elaborate a little bit on that, on the answer. And also the working group, welcome to the working group.
Yeah.
So Karen, go ahead.
Sure. So I think that's a great question. I think that's a question that House Corrections and Institutions also struggled with a lot last year, right? And I think in reality, we're already serving these populations together, right? There already are folks in the hospital who have both mental illness needs and intellectual disability needs. And so we're really already doing this. And I think when they took a tour earlier this year, they really were able to kind of see that. The differences in treatment are not that big in terms of what we think we can provide in one setting. And again, because we're already really kind of doing it, we don't think it would be a large transition. So certainly happy to hear other people talk about it, but from our perspective, that is work we're already doing. They are already co-located, often in facilities.
Wait, but that is contradictory to what you just said earlier before I asked the question. You said, actually, for the intellectual disabilities, this is a new thing. It's not being done yet. So
in the
how is it that
we're serving them together in the hospital? So if they meet, there are folks in the hospital who are meeting hospital level of care that have both needs. What we're talking about is not people in the hospital, but then people transitioning out of the hospital.
Okay, and so I understand it, I think, for people who have both needs, who maybe have mental health issues and intellectual health disabilities. But what about people who have one or the other? Isn't it, better to serve somebody who just has intellectual disability needs in a facility that's specifically for their needs, rather than trying to mix the population out of convenience?
Karen, do you mind if I answer or chime in?
Yeah.
for the record, Emily Haas, Commissioner for the Department of Mental Health. I would like to add a little bit onto that. So one of the, I think it depends on what your lens of treatment is. So when I think about treatment at a residential level of care, the things that people really benefit from are structure, which we can provide, long-term skill building, which we can provide and do really well at, as well as close collaboration with the community partners, because it would be the goal that somebody then transitions back out into the community for their programming. So treatment goes across all of those different entities. And so when you think about a person who, may have only an intellectual disability, although there might be humans, we're all humans, and so they may have periods of depression, anxiety, or something like that. Those are gonna be things that folks can work on through a treatment program. And that the psychology staff, social work staff, and nursing staff at the hospital can provide. And again, the short term goes out into the community, and it's those short-term stabilization structure that benefits humans who are, trying to live a relatively stable life. And so from my perspective, there's not too big of a highway between what makes somebody stable. I get that from an intellectual disability perspective, and I don't want to speak for my friends at Dale, but that is a more habilitative versus rehabilitative approach. But I think when you're at your highest acuity, there's a lot of needs there before you're going out into your long-term program, which would then be really focused on what those long-term needs are.
So, yeah, what I'm gonna suggest is we continue on with the testimony, and that may offer some clarity. And I do know that we spent a lot of time last year talking about this very question, what kinds of services and who should be where. So we'll continue with that, and then we'll come back, because these are all important questions to answer. So, Karen, why don't you go ahead with your testimony?
I wanted to note that currently the legislation calls for the facility to be at BPCH. And I just wanted to note that we'd prefer that to be more flexible and not specifically name a facility. I think as we talked a little bit about last time, there are some CMS concerns about using the BPCH facility. And so we need to kind of really think about renovations to make separate and distinct facilities. And we're still working with BGS to get those estimates, but just kind of wanted to raise that as an issue. One of the other things, there was a lot of discussion last time was about orders being for 90 days versus up to 90 days. There's not a short, simple answer to that because it's spread across multiple different statutory sections. So it's probably easiest if I follow up with Katie offline about this, but I just wanted to make the committee aware that I heard your concerns about that last time, and there is a reason we say up to 90 days. And the last thing I wanted to just touch on before I opened it up to questions is the timelines in the bill. It's really just not possible for a facility to be operational by July 1. If it were to be at BPCH, we need time to be able to do the renovations, and we need money to do so. We also don't know yet the population that will be served in the facility. And so we can't draft the TCR regs until we know what kind of facility we're trying to create. So having an April 1 date to draft TCR regs when we may not know until after April 1st kind of sets us up for failure. So from our perspective, we first need to kind of understand from the legislature who is going to go into the facility, where the facility is going to be and what it's going to look like, and then we can kind of work to quickly draft those regulations. But I just kind of wanted to raise that the timelines in the bill are going to need to be adjusted as we kind of work through the process.
Thank you.
And those were the points that you kind of touched upon last time, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. No, I'm sure there will still be fundamental questions going forward, but we'll listen to, other folks and try to get our, as I said, we need to get our arms around this one. Any other questions for Karen at this point? And Karen, please stay on if you can, because I said before, it'll be an opportunity for a broader discussion if we can get there, hear some testimony, and then get to a broader discussion, comments, and questions.
Absolutely.
So, all right, so Megan Tierney Ward is here, interim commissioner, Department of, is Megan here?
Yes.
Yeah, there
Yes,
you are. Okay.
this is Megan.
I saw you.
Thank you. And for the record, Megan Tierney Ward. I am interim commissioner for a short period for Dale. And we have Stuart Schur, who's here, our general counsel, who will be going through similar information that Karen just did from the perspective of Dale. We also invited Dr. Frawley to join us as a clinical expert in the work that we do today, so that if other questions come up, he can share his perspective. So thank you, Commissioner Hawes and Karen. We align across the board, and I think that Stuart can share that additional information and maybe a little more context to the question of what is it people will need. The only thing I will add to that conversation is that folks who come in through Act 248 will have unique needs. So we will be sure that folks who come in through this process have programming that's specific to that individual. And the important part will be what resources and expertise we have in the forensic facility to be able to meet those needs. So I'm going to hand this over to Stuart to walk through some of the other Dale perspective and the draft of the bill.
Great. Thanks, Megan. Good morning. For the record, I'm Stuart Schur, General Counsel for the Department of Disabilities, Aging, and Independent Living. I want to start by thanking the committee for considering this important issue and to state that Dale supports SY 92 as it would establish a forensic facility in Vermont to address a current gap in the system of care as it pertains to persons with intellectual disability who are served under Act 248. Act 248, for those of you who aren't as familiar with it, is named after the act from 1987 that created the system, and it pertains to the commitment of individuals with an intellectual disability who have been deemed not competent to stand trial by the criminal division of the Superior Court, or who have been adjudicated not guilty by reason of insanity, who present a danger of harm to others, and for whom appropriate custody, care, and habilitation can be provided by the commissioner in a designated program. Now, I want to specifically mention that Dale's conclusion that a forensic facility is needed for a small subset of those committed to the Dale Commissioner's custody was the conclusion reached by the majority of the members of the Act 27 working group, which was asked to opine on that very issue. It's also important to note that the vast majority of individuals who are committed to the Commissioner's custody under Act 248 are in fact successfully served in a community-based designated program. And currently that includes 28 of the 29 individuals in Act 248. But when a community-based placement isn't appropriate to meet the needs of the individual and places the public and the individual's support staff at an unreasonable risk of harm, there are currently no suitable alternatives for that individual under the developmental services system of care. As noted in the working group's report, if community-based designated program cannot be developed, the placement options are limited. Most significantly, the individual may need to remain in DOC custody, which we've learned is not a suitable environment and in fact presents a greater risk to the individual with intellectual disabilities. A forensic facility.
Stuart,
Sure.
Just to clarify, what you just said is sending these folks to jail is an inappropriate place for them and to provide treatment. So you said DOC custody, and the implication is there they'd go into a jail cell. Would they have services? That's another question.
That's right. I think what the working group learned was that while what we know is that while those individuals cannot be sentenced for the crime, they could not have been tried and convicted of the crime with which they've been charged. But pending that determination by the court of incompetence, they have there are limited options as to where that individual could go. They can either remain in jail in DOC custody awaiting that competency evaluation, or and potentially wait for a program in the community, which may never be developed to meet that individual's needs and the community safety needs. So without an option, that person sits in jail potentially waiting for some other option. And we've learned from DOC during the working group meetings that it is not appropriate for individuals. Number one, the lack of specialized training that's available to DOC staff to provide to individuals with intellectual disability just isn't there. And also, they are potentially at risk of greater victimization, individuals with intellectual disability in that environment. So a forensic facility that's available as an alternative when a court deems to be necessary based on a review of clinical and dangerousness factors, and in fact, the least restrictive setting for the individual, is a critical tool to have in the system of care toolbox. The forensic facility would be used as an environment to assess, treat, and stabilize the individual through the provision of professional on-site services and supports, with the goal of discharging the person to a community-based setting when the forensic facility is no longer the least restrictive setting for the individual, based upon a clinical assessment and a judicial determination. The individual's progress and needs would be constantly reviewed to ensure the forensic facility is, in fact, the least restrictive setting for that individual. And with the support of the designated agencies, which will be tasked with engaging the individual and developing a discharge plan, starting at the time of the individual's admission to the forensic facility, Dale believes that the facility can offer the needed stabilizing supports to assist in the successful transition of the individual to a community-based setting. So before I turn it over to Dr. Frawley, who is kind enough to join us today to talk about the types of programming that would be appropriate in the forensic facility for individuals with intellectual disability, I did just want to comment on a few specific provisions of the bill. And I do understand that this bill, as introduced, is a work in progress, and the committee will be making some changes to it. And I understand that Katie will be making some changes as well. But with that said, I did want to draw the committee's attention to page 3 of the bill, section 3, which is 13 VSA section 4821. And it states that procedures for persons with intellectual disabilities shall be provided in 18 VSA chapter 206 subchapter 3. But as I'll discuss in a little bit, those procedures in 18 VSA section 8845 appear to apply exclusively to proceedings in which an individual is being considered for commitment to or discharge from the custody of the Dale Commissioner, not to those proceedings involving placement in or discharge from the forensic facility. Subsections B and C identify the clinical factors that the Human Services Community Safety Panel is to consider in determining whether placement in the forensic facility is appropriate. However, these subsections do not clearly address the legal standard to be applied by a court in determining whether such a placement should be ordered. So those are the comments with respect to section 4821, or section 3 of the bill.
So Stuart, before you continue, you'll be sending us your testimony in writing. So yeah, because
it's a lot.
Otherwise, you're going along pretty quickly here, and it's hard for, I think, committee members just to stay glued into what you're saying. So if you could just assure us you're sending in your testimony, that'd be great.
I will do that. Absolutely.
Thank you.
So the next section that I would draw your attention to is section 12 of the bill, which is on page 19. And that discusses 13 VSA section 4823. And again, these are from the criminal procedure section of Vermont statutes. And subsection A of 4823 speaks generally to an order of commitment, but it doesn't speak to a specific setting in which the individual will reside. Subsection B then says that when an individual is being considered for Act 248 commitment, or the court is considering a discharge from an order of commitment, The review procedures in 18 VSA 8845 shall be followed. But the section is silent as to what procedures are to be followed if the issue being considered is placement or discharge from the forensic facility, not from the Act 248 commitment itself. So as such, it's unclear whether the courts are to follow the procedures set out in 8845 when considering the issue of placement in the facility or discharge from the facility, as opposed to commitment to the custody of the commissioner. And then subsection C speaks to the commissioner's request for forensic facility placement, but it's silent as to the content or the form of the court's order, the legal standards for governing the court's determination, the duration of an order for placement in the forensic facility, or the right to review such a placement. And these were comments that Dale concurred with that were made during the working group discussions, that clarity in the statute was really important, and distinguishing between the commitment of an individual to the commissioner's custody and then a determination of where that individual could be placed, whether it be in the forensic facility or whether they could be placed in the community where, as I said before, the vast majority of people in Act 248 are placed. So the statute should be really clear. We would advocate for a very clear distinction between those processes and an understanding of what the court's obligations are and what the criteria are for considering those questions. And I know I'm going through a lot of this really quickly, so it will all be in writing for you, but I just wanted to give you a 1,000-foot view of what our initial observations were of the initial bill.
And as Katie indicated earlier, she's going to share with us some language that the House Judiciary has been looking at, so that may also help clarify.
Yes, great. The last section that I would turn to is on page 24 of the bill, which is section 19. And that's the discussion of 18 VSA sections 8845. And that is where the bulk of the procedures that we're talking about will live. A and B of 8845 appear, as noted earlier, to speak exclusively to procedures to be followed when considering commitment or continued commitment to the commissioner's custody, but not to the individual's placement in the forensic facility. And then subsection C provides that the commissioner may seek to place a person in a forensic facility subsequent to the date on which the criminal division commits the person to the custody of the Dale commissioner. And Dale does support this option. We recognize that individuals who are originally placed in a community-based setting may later engage in dangerous or assaultive behavior or elopements that make the setting unsafe for the public. Dale believes that the forensic facility would be a useful option to help stabilize the individual and return them to the community. But Dale notes that under such circumstances, the court would need a contemporaneous recommendation of the Human Services Community Safety Panel. As written, subsection C could be read to mean that the original recommendation of the Human Services Community Safety Panel would be reviewed and considered by the court. But such a recommendation could be outdated and no longer instructive as to the individual's current needs. Finally, in support of the assertion, as I mentioned earlier, that 8845 as written may not clearly and adequately apply to proceedings concerning the placement of individuals in the facility, subsection F speaks to a clear and convincing standard, but that standard applies to determination of continued custody, not continued placement in the forensic facility. So I want to thank you again for your consideration. And if you like, I can turn it over to Dr. Frawley, who can speak to the issues of programming, or I can answer any questions that you might have.
Why don't we turn it over to Dr. Frawley, and then we'll have questions for everyone who's spoken on behalf of Dale. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. I'm Pat Frawley. I'm the director of the Vermont Crisis Intervention Network, which is a statewide crisis support and intervention program.
Hold on a second, please. We've got some competing sounds going on. I don't know who it is, but I think I know who it is. Okay, are we all set then? Sorry for the interruption, Dr. Frawley. Why don't you
That's
just
okay.
go? Yeah,
I'll start
go
over.
ahead.
So I'm the director of the Vermont Crisis Intervention Network, which is a statewide crisis support and intervention program in developmental services, and I have run that program since we developed it 33 years ago. Basically, that's all I've ever done. And you know, I think it would be interesting for you to hear what it's like for someone who is in corrections right now with a developmental disability. I hadn't prepared these remarks, but I thought that we could really benefit from hearing this. So I've been to visit a woman a few times at the Chittenden Correctional Facility, and she is a woman with a developmental disability who can speak, but is currently not speaking. So when I go to visit her, they, you know, walk you through these doors, and then they bring you down this hallway, and you're facing a door, and then they open up this little slot that's about that big, like, you know, like a foot across and 6 inches high. And that's how you try to communicate with her. And basically, she's in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. And this is not what she needs, right? I mean, if you went to visit her, you would walk away potentially crying or thinking, oh my God, this is wrong. This is not what she needs. So what folks like this are going to really benefit from is a place where they can receive psychiatric and psychological assessment and treatment in an ongoing and intensive manner. It's not complicated work. You know, it's fairly straightforward once you have the players in place who can deliver these services. Beyond this, of course, they'll need regular medical attention and nursing care. There'll be a very important component of communication supports for folks that are in this facility, because folks with developmental disabilities oftentimes don't have the greatest communication abilities. There would have to be a sensitivity to that issue. Beyond that, I would recommend really intense clinical meetings on a weekly basis where the clinical staff from the facility, Dale folks, and folks from the agency that's going to serve the person meet regularly every week in order to discuss progress and how to plan for the person's return to the community. That's the exact model that we have utilized in our crisis beds for the 33 years that we've done that. And most of the time, we're able to return people to the community, even with dangerous behavior. But there are certainly people we cannot serve and have said no to who are too dangerous at the time for community placement in our crisis beds. And one final thing, I think that this facility could benefit from consultation from my program, whether it be me or some of my clinicians. We have great experience in treating folks with developmental disabilities in a crisis kind of format. And I think that would be beneficial. I'll happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I mean, I think that your perspective is extremely helpful to folks around the table. It really clarifies the situation that we're trying to remedy in many ways. So thank you. Question from Senator Williams.
Just a general couple of questions. So the people testifying all seem to be in favor of this. Are we going to get a chance to hear from people that?
Well, we have a whole list here, so
Okay.
we'll have to go through, and
Okay.
sometimes everybody agrees and sometimes they don't agree.
Okay.
So we'll just see what happens.
Okay, so
And what we don't want to do is to replicate the the 27 Act 27 working group, because there were disagreements on that, and then there was some consensus on some areas, and then there was majority consensus on others, and there are still folks who have concerns. So we're going to hear from those folks. So that's important for us to understand. It's not an easy topic.
So my next question is, sounds like kind of an experimental process we're going through now. We have a facility that's available that provides the services that we need. It sounds like we want to get them out of the corrections facilities. Do you ever see the possibility of an annex being put on a correction facility to house the people that need to be in this type of facility? I don't care who answers it.
Yeah, I don't think that's for me.
That's not for
Okay.
him, but it's for, I think, Dale or the administration generally. Go ahead.
I'm thinking if it ever gets to the point where we need more than 9 beds, you know, where will we put them? Will we build another facility? Will we add an annex on? So I can see a need possibly if somebody's adjudicated not competent to stand trial, and then the medication and the treatment changes that. Would they go back to the same district court to be tried? So maybe they have family in that area rather than moving them, you know, 100 miles away.
These are great questions, Senator.
Stuart,
You're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I can try to answer that question. I'm not sure I can fully respond to the sort of the brick and mortar question about where the facility, an additional facility would be appropriate. But what I can say, I can reiterate that, as I said, the vast majority of individuals with intellectual disability are served in the community. We anticipate a very small number of individuals who would be even eligible or would be considered by the Agency of Human Services for placement in the facility because, you know, 98% of the people are currently successfully served in the community. But that said, I think that we're looking at, again, maybe 0 people per year, maybe 1 person per year. So really that's the only answer I have right now. I don't really know where an additional facility may or may not be appropriate. At this point, we don't anticipate having that great a need for more than the beds that are currently being considered at VPCH.
Okay, so if you develop a plan, I think I understand where we're coming from and for the need for this, but I don't think we thought it through. What happens right from a public safety standpoint? I hear from law enforcement that there are a lot of mental health issues out there that we haven't even glossed over. We haven't even really identified. What happens if all of a sudden we need beds for 50 people?
So
I'm happy to answer that. So I think for our testimony today, this is specifically about folks who have been deemed incompetent by the court. And so that is a relatively small group of folks. Most folks who receive a competency evaluation are found competent. Most of those evaluations happen outside of the hospital setting. So we're really looking at, with this bill, a very small group of folks who've been deemed incompetent. And yes, medication and other modalities of treatment may move somebody from competence or incompetency to competency. And a court would rule on that, and then the proceedings could, you know, potentially go forward. But there's a lot of things that could happen in that timeline. A case could be dismissed. You know, so it depends on a person's current situation. And so, you know, Karen mentioned earlier around the language, wanting our desire to have a little more flexibility with the language around specific to VPCH, because we need to understand who is going into a potential permanent facility and if the 9 beds at VPCH are appropriate. From other states, their experience with this population, with both populations, is they are in state hospitals for a very long time. And it's really challenging to get folks into their communities. What we don't want to do is repeat that mistake. And we do feel like we have a small group of folks who we could better serve in a facility to come back out into the community. And it is a complex issue and a tough issue to talk through. But I think for this testimony, it's really those folks around that we're looking at for competency. Not to downplay that we don't have communities and humans struggling and experiencing symptoms of mental illness and substance use and everything that folks are working through in our communities, but for this, it's just for competency.
Because I can see where this kind of flows into what we heard yesterday. Hospitals in our district saying, we need beds because we've got beds because we don't have any place to put people. If they happen to be if they have a mental disability or mental health issue, then we may end up having twice as many people as we need. I'm just looking for the plan.
Yeah.
So people can ask questions and I can give them an answer when they ask about this bill.
I'll say from a mental health bed perspective, at our highest level of care, there are open beds in our system today. And there's several open beds in our system overall today. And that is for folks who meet hospital level of care. Where our most complex conversations happen, and there is, I think, frustration from service providers is folks who don't meet hospital level care. Where can we serve those folks? And we, as a system, we implement more upstream stuff, which is great. We want to intervene with folks early.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that can start in childhood up through the age spectrum. And so if we're serving folks earlier, then hopefully folks aren't getting to the point where they need those highest levels of care. And I think that's our goal. We really want to be able to do that in a community setting. And from we do have a small group of folks who interact with the system. And we want to be able to serve them safely for their own safety and the safety of the staff that are serving them.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Good, thank you. So another question.
Yeah, thank you. This is helpful. This one I think is for Dr. Hawley, because you've hopefully heard my question earlier about the services and whether or not both populations could be served in the same kind of facility. And specifically for people with intellectual disabilities, I'm just wondering if you feel like the sort of mixing of those populations, especially for people who have one or the other, not both, is feasible and appropriate. I totally hear you that prison is not the right place, and that's a sad, horrible reality right now. I don't want that to be where we land for sure, but is from a clinical perspective, the sort of mixing, do you think feasible and appropriate?
I do think it would be okay that way. There might be some advantage to separation of the groups, but when I think about it, most of the people that are going to be receiving services in this setting will have an intellectual capacity that is quite close to the qualifying IQ level of 70 or maybe even beyond folks with developmental disabilities qualifying on the autism spectrum. So I think you're imagining that the populations are extremely different, and I think that they're probably not that different. Most
I don't
folks,
know what I'm imagining. I'm not an expert. I'm just trying to be a responsible policymaker.
most folks who are receiving developmental services who are really different from the general population, like you're talking about, are quite easily served in the community, even folks on Act 248. Yeah, I like your question a lot. I don't know. I think it's probably going to be okay.
Okay, that's not extremely reassuring. So,
well, I've never run a facility like this, so I'm just supposing.
Okay.
And this is a question that we could ask over and over again last year when we passed our original bill. So it's a continuing concern, and it is a continuing concern, I think, that came out of the working group. So we want to ensure that the services are available and that folks are cared for appropriately and get back to the community if possible. So your cautious response is appreciated, but we'll see where we get to. And we're going to, Commissioner, go ahead.
Thank you. As someone who has run the Vermont Psychiatric Care Hospital, how we approach who's admitted there now, like who is on a certain milieu, and what's a mix of individuals based on what their needs are, which is a variety of folks. They serve folks across the age span, all involuntary with a mix of different diagnoses and needs. So when I think about a forensic facility, your clinical team is still going to have all to say around how you know, as the unit is set up right now, there's 4 beds on one side and there's 5 beds on another. We'd like to not have it that separate so that there's an opportunity for more actual treatment space versus bedroom space, because the goal would be that folks aren't in their rooms and that they're out of their rooms. And so a lot of that, you know, sort of interaction and treatment approaches are really going to be defined by that treatment team and what the individual needs, balancing what the needs are of everybody else on the unit. And they're doing that now. And so there is a skill set to that, that we would want those folks who are working directly with individuals to be able to determine.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm interested in moving along, but I did have one further question. So it may be for Karen Barber to clarify for us the one person who would be placed with an intellectual disability, to characterize that individual. What are the characteristics? Hospitalization, incompetency, committed a crime. What are the characteristics of that individual who would be placed into this secure facility? Because we heard 28 out of 29 are treated in the community, so there's one person left.
Senator, I think that would be a question for me.
Okay, let's do that.
Sure. Yeah, I saw the.
I got it.
That's okay. Now I saw the look of confusion on Karen's face. Like, why am I being asked about intellectual disabilities? No, Act 248. You're right. 28 of the 29 people are being successfully served in the community. That one individual is someone who, the typical person, I suppose, who would be eligible for placement in the forensic facility would be someone who has engaged in such violent behavior that the court and the department believes that they could not be served safely in a community-based setting, which is a home, often in a neighborhood, although it may be a little bit more remote. But it's someone who has exhibited such violent behaviors. For example, alleged first-degree murder, second-degree murder. These are violent individuals who cannot be placed or should not be placed in a community-based setting, in anything less than a secure setting. But the individual could be someone who repeatedly elopes from their designated program, where staff in the home don't have the ability to put hands on the person to bring them back. In fact, they walk out the front door of their home. Police can be called. Police may or may not respond. While police have the option of picking that individual up and returning them back to the program, that's really all they can do unless that person has committed a new crime, in which case they could arrest them, take them to jail, and then the whole cycle starts over again. If they're released, they can go back to the designated program in the community, only to run away again, potentially commit a new crime out in the community, and for the whole cycle to occur. So we're looking at a very small subset of individuals who have exhibited violent behaviors, or once they're placed in a community setting, they continue to engage in assaultive behavior, striking their support staff in the home, running away, eloping from the program, and there really is no way to ensure the public safety if they're in a community setting where they can't be prevented from leaving. So that is the one person that we think of is that person who has exhibited one or more of those behaviors.
Thank you. I think that offers some clarity. Thank you. So let's move ahead unless there are other questions for folks. This has been a really good discussion. So let's move on to Susan Aronoff. Silent Susan.
Outed. That would be a good nickname. I mean, I could aspire to that.
So, and Kristen is also here from the council. Do you want to be here?
No, I'm not here to testify. Susan's been our point person.
Okay, terrific.
I'm here in support of what she has to say.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. First of all, thank you for the invitation to testify, and thank you for spending so much time on this topic this morning. I submitted written comments. They're quite lengthy. In the interest of time, I'm going to hit the high notes. Before I begin, I just kind of want to center who I am and what I'm doing here, since I'm very new to many of you on the committee, though not all of you. So my name is Susan Aronoff. I describe myself sometimes as a recovering lawyer. I was a lawyer. I worked for Vermont Protection and Advocacy, now Disability Rights. And then I worked in Connecticut for 15 years, based in a large hospital setting that has a very famous forensic institute. I also taught master's level mental health law for 5 years at the University of New Haven's Chang School of Forensic Sciences, or whatever their name is. They change their name every 2 years, I think, for fun, whatever. And so that's my background. Now, I'd like to say a little bit about the council and just give you some caveats to frame my testimony. When you receive email from me, it's Susan Aronoff, Vermont.gov. I am an Agency of Human Services employee. However, I have the very unique and I think luxurious role of working for the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council. That's a mouthful. Every state has a Developmental Disabilities Council. We're a creature of federal law. You'll see us in the budget, but we don't receive any state funding. We're one of two councils that don't receive state funding, and that's very intentional on our part. I never want to have to come here and ask for money for my salary. It puts me in a position where I can talk to you about the issues free and clear and not worry. And why can I, as an Agency of Human Services employee, talk to you about the issues and be at odds with my colleagues, Stuart Scher, Karen Barber, who I respect greatly, Commissioner Pause. I was going to say Sean. I was like, that's not right. Pause. I have a little dyslexia. Okay, pause. And the reason why is because the council exists to be the voice of people with developmental disabilities and their family members in the state of Vermont. We estimate by the federal definition of developmental disability, there are 86,000 Vermonters touched by developmental disability. The definition that Medicaid uses and people who get services in the state, that narrows it down to about 5,000 people. But there are 5,000 Vermonters with an intellectual or developmental disability who are eligible for and do receive Medicaid-funded home and community-based services. And so we care greatly, our members care greatly, about the quality of services available in Vermont and access to services in Vermont, really from cradle to grave. So I get involved in special education issues, I might see you over there, budget issues, got some great government operations issues. You'll hear about them coming up. But so we're involved in any issue that touches the lives of people with developmental disabilities. And in order to receive that federal funding, the state has to house and feed us, and then also comply with some really clear guidelines. They are not allowed to interfere with our advocacy. So we are free to advocate and express positions at odds with all these people who I respect. And I like to say reasonable people can disagree. And I think this is an issue. I love that Karen Barber started with what problem are we trying to solve? Because the main problem we were trying to solve was the fact that Vermont was one of only 2 states that had no place to accomplish the goal of restoring people to competency. So what does that mean? To be competent to be a witness, you have to be able to assist in your own defense. You have to be able to talk to your lawyer. You have to know who the judge is, who the jury is. So some people with psychiatric disabilities are not competent to stand trial. They can go through a competency restoration process. You've received a report on competency restoration.
And actually, this is good for us because Commissioner Hawes is prepared to talk about that a little bit later on.
Okay. So it's 170 something pages. In the beginning, it sets out competency restoration. What is it? A lot of competency restoration, the vast majority, I think that's the statistic they use, upwards of 90% is accomplished through chemicals, through drugs, through involuntary medication. So I will tell you, people with intellectual disabilities, there's not a medication on earth that changes someone's IQ. There's not a medication on earth that's going to change someone who communicate except but through facilitated communication, or the young woman that Dr. Frawley described. Medication restoration does not work. Those people are not in this pipeline to be restored to competency. Vermont needed a place to restore people to competency. The legislation that's been passed so far has accomplished that goal. Vermont will be able to medicate people, to restore people to competency involuntarily. And to Stuart Scher's point about needing a place where people can be subjected to those involuntary procedures, that's code for restraint, seclusion, involuntary medication. I would submit you could change the rules for community-based residences if that's what's missing in the system, a community-based setting where these procedures can be used, then you don't have to put people with intellectual disabilities into an institutional setting, into what we call a hot unit. And because of your question, Senator Hardy, I just want to say a little bit more about who I am and where we fit in this. There was an Act 27 working group. Madam Chair, when you say we talked like been there, done that, I feel it because these conversations, we had them over and over again. But I want to say the working group reached a consensus that we needed something else in the system, but I don't think the working group reached a consensus that we needed to mix the populations, that was a good thing, or that we needed to put people in the psychiatric. And
I don't think anyone has said that. I think the report speaks for itself.
Right. Yeah. So I think that there were places we agreed on, we need something else in the system. And I think people wouldn't disagree with that. I think the other thing that I just want to address some of the testimony that went before me before I get into my comments. What Dr. Frawley didn't say is that for the 33 years that he's run his excellent program, there were only 3 houses. And only since COVID did we get a 4th. Maybe we give him 6, 8. Maybe he could do more with more resources and with a change in rules. The other thing I want to say about Department of Corrections, and I agree, in our current Department of Corrections, I don't think our Department of Corrections passes muster meeting the needs of people with a range of disabilities, but I don't know that DOC as an entire unit should be left off the hook that easily for people in the criminal justice system in other states, the great state of Connecticut. When states were given the permission to lock up people who committed sex offenses indefinitely, the state of Connecticut looked into, well, how can we do this more humanely? Maybe we put houses, actual houses, into gated communities on the campuses of our correctional facilities, so that these people who you're never gonna let back into society can watch television in a Barca lounger and not be looking through the world in a concrete. That's what other states are doing. Now, Connecticut has a very different tax base than we have, but there are things, there are things we can do here. So if you're gonna take anything away from my testimony, it's that people with intellectual disabilities are not gonna be restored to competency, and that people with intellectual disabilities have been, even people who under Act 248 who become violent, 20 out of 29 are in the community, and I believe with more resources could be in the community now. And I just want to talk a little bit before I leave about what are some of the systemic obstacles and I would say failures, and that this is where I really like government operations to look, and I think the Senate needs to tune into this. Our Agency of Human Services is under 2 plans of correction that I am aware of in the home and community-based space having to do with home and community-based services. I don't know what plans of correction there might be in DCF or DOC or anywhere else. I would love if a question that gets asked in appropriations or elsewhere is, Madam Secretary or Commissioner, can you tell us about any plans of correction? Because another one of our federal assurances is we, the DD counts, are supposed to be involved in quality improvement activities. And you know from last year, you passed a quality improvement bill and all new positions. There's a lot of quality improvement activities going on in Dale and AHS. We've been kept a lot in the dark, particularly about these corrective action plans. So I write about the corrective action plans in here. That's specific to Dale. But you guys were all really familiar with what happened at Woodside with the OC. And there's a big takeaway from Commissioner Winters, and I'd like you to follow up with him, government operations on this. He maintained and he testified that the state should not be both the regulator and the provider. It took 7 years before Lindsay's agency was able to sue. I don't want anyone to suffer what Grace suffered. I referred to that in my comments. So another thing there was consensus on in the working group was if you do this facility, you have to have robust oversight and fund protection advocacy. And I want to talk a little bit. I love that Dr. Frawley said, please add me to the clinical team. The admission in this facility, not only do I think the AH facilities require independent oversight, if I were to submit comments on what could be fixed about the bill, the admissions process is what I call a star chamber. It is only AHS talking to AHS. And I worked in AHS prior to this job. Commissioners have all the authority, all the responsibility and none of the authority. It's an agency of one. So all you have in that group of who decides to go in is AHS. It's a voice of one. There's no requirement in there that there be a clinical weigh-in. Having Dr. Frawley attached or any clinical subject matter expert for people with intellectual disabilities, I think would be an essential check and balance. And I want to echo Senator Kitchell here a second. I think this agency could maybe be broken up. It's so big, and there's just no daylight between. And I have tremendous respect for Stuart Scher and Karen Barber, but I think if the Department of this, if they were separate, you might have separate testimony. And on that note, I'm going to leave you with what a former commissioner of Dale said when this exact question was asked before. History is always repeating itself, and the former Dale commissioner, the late Joan Senecal, wrote that certain individuals are particularly hard to serve in any setting. They may have complex psychiatric needs. They may be highly resistant to supervision. They may try to elope. They may be highly assaultive to staff and to peers. They may be extremely emotionally volatile. These characteristics may make it difficult to supervise these individuals in a shared living home or group home. It may be difficult to retain staff to work with them. This was 10 years ago. When these characteristics are combined with the risk to public, agencies may feel overwhelmed. In the past 2 decades, a few agencies stepped forward to take on these exceptionally challenging individuals, but at present, no agencies feel able to accept hard-to-serve individuals from another region because of concerns about budget, liability, community reaction. This is the punchline. Some people have suggested a small, secure facility to house a group of these uniquely hard-to-serve individuals, but it is unlikely that grouping the most hard-to-serve individuals together in a single location would be beneficial or cost-effective. The individuals who are the hardest to serve are difficult and dangerous in unique ways. To assemble the combination of treatment and staffing resources to meet the differing needs of the individuals in a single location while keeping the individuals safe from one another would almost certainly exceed the cost of our currently individual tailored services. And the cost that we're proposing for this facility that were given to Representative Garofano and the committee as a whole, not in the report though, $3,400 a day per bed per person. That's over $1 million per year. We could build 2 units of service-supported housing for $1 million. So we're going to hold someone in a bed, or are we going to build the community housing we desperately need? That's the choice. That's your guys' choice. We urge you to choose housing, not more institutions.
Thank you. And you did reference the working group report, which is critically important. You've also expressed your concerns that you did express during the working group process, and I appreciate it. But I do have a question. So we have this one person who's committed murder, crime.
This is a hypothetical.
Yeah.
Okay.
Intellectual disability.
Okay.
And so your solution is to provide a single residential facility for this individual, period. How does that individual become, I'm asking you, how would you deal with that individual, I guess? That's my question.
So my understanding is there might even be people have been historically people under Act 248 who have been accused of murder. I'm not a clinician, but my understanding is that until this person ended up in corrections, people have been served in the community. So I represented someone, I will tell you, who spent a year in 4-point bed restraint in the bowels of the Whiting Forensic Institute. He assaulted 27 staff, put them out on comp. CMS came to the facility and found them out of compliance. This gentleman left the Forensic Institute, propped up like Hannibal Lecter in restraints, ankle chain, flew on a $15,000 medical jet to California, and was out of restraint. He had 3-on-1 staffing. He continued to be problematic, and so he had to be limited with his public exposure. But with 3-on-1 staffing, I visited him in California and had lunch with him in a cafeteria. Now, to your question, he didn't murder anyone. He assaulted people. He could have murdered someone, but with the right services and supports, he had a really different life.
So I'm trying to understand then what you would do with that one individual and what kind of services would be provided and where that person would be housed.
He had an ankle, so
I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about
so
my
an individual like that would have as much public safety apparatus as can be applied, and that includes alarms and ankle bracelets and monitors and programming. So, you know, the pathway into Act 248 would presuppose that the person was not competent to stand trial.
Got it.
So I believe you've raised.
But actually, can I also amend anything? People don't always like to hear this from me, but I'm going to give you this little thing. In criminal justice law and in public health law, it's supposed to be two really different pathways.
Yes.
The power that the state gets to take someone off the street is either because they're a public safety threat or because they're a person in need of treatment. So you're either in loco parentis or your parents' patriot. And I believe what we've done in Vermont is we've blended the public safety and the public health. My personal view is they should be separate and DOC should have humane facilities. That's my view. That's not the DD Council's view, but do I think those systems work better? Yes. Do I think people's due process ends up being protected better? I've seen people in the mental health system serve way more time for shoplifting than they ever would have served in the criminal justice system.
So
And
you're
people
talking
get into
public
248 and they
safety.
never get out.
So, thank you. I just
Yeah.
want to clarify that we're talking about a judicial order. So it's an order from the judge. It's not a public safety. Public safety may have been involved in the initial event, but now we're talking about a judge giving an order for
But I mean,
determination of
yeah.
competency, for example.
but we hold people either because they're dangerous or because they need our help.
Yes.
And we've combined holding the people who are dangerous with the people who need our help. And
Okay.
I think that's where things get messy, because you don't help people very well by incarcerating them.
No, and that's one of the goals here, is to
And then
make
you have-
sure that they're not held in jail while their competency evaluation is going on. I mean, honestly, I think that is just clear across the board.
And I think you fixed, so that's the other thing, ending where I started. You had a lot of problems you wanted to solve. That backlog was one of them. And I
We
think you
did it.
fixed that backlog, and you fixed the where are we gonna hold people pre-competency and where are we gonna hold people who might be not guilty by reason of insanity. We didn't have that either. We have that now. So I'd say, good job.
Senator Weeks has a question for you.
If I could, thank you for your
Hi.
testimony. The question, you raised an interesting point, but the question's not really for you. It's for the two commissioners.
Okay.
So I understand the problem we're trying to solve, fully supportive. My question is, what analysis have we done that these services or this facility could be provided by those that are around us, Massachusetts, New York, New Hampshire, versus creating the facility in-state? I just wonder if you could give me a couple seconds on.
Are you asking is the question, have we done an analysis of the neighboring facilities and their approaches
Right,
to
could
serving folks?
they serve this very small community without Vermont having to build its own?
Oh, I got it. So could we send folks to
Right.
those, got it, sorry. Took
Because
me a second.
as she mentioned, the movement to California, et cetera, it's,
And I'm not sure how long ago that was, but my guess is that was decades ago when that individual was in Connecticut in 4-point restraints. The approach to care is very different now than it was even 15 years ago. So there are a lot of necessary regulations for how long somebody can be in restraints. But the short answer is I do not believe we can send folks out of state to other facilities.
okay,
I don't believe we have the power to do that.
okay, that's fair.
Yeah,
That's a boundary that's
Yeah,
important
yeah.
to this issue. Thank you.
I'm happy to touch on that if you want.
Please go ahead. And then Senator Gulick has a question.
Sure. So legally, Vermont court orders are just for Vermont. So a Vermont court couldn't involuntarily send someone in our custody to another state. There are mechanisms to do things like that called interstate transfers, but those are generally from one state hospital to another state hospital. And there's a whole process where somebody has to, the other state has to accept them and decide to take them under their custody. Generally, there has to be family there. But generally, a court's jurisdiction is just within the state. Corrections is a little different in that they can have contracts with other states. So if you're talking about someone under corrections custody, that's a different analysis than someone, say, under DMH or Dale custody, where we couldn't send someone out of state.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Gulick, wait.
I'm sorry.
Senator Gulick, are you on this? This is related to what was answered, is yours is?
No, mine's different.
Let's
So
continue with that.
if the individual is here, claims residence in another state that provides that service, could we send them back to their state?
Sure, if someone wanted to voluntarily go to another state and accept services, they could. We would have to take them out of our custody and it would be a voluntary decision. If they went to another state, that didn't mean that that state could then make the decision to involuntarily kind of put them under their custody if they met criteria.
Thank you.
And the way that interstate compact works is the receiving state, a family member or community is saying that this person is from our community and we will take responsibility. So my initial answer was no, because I was thinking about Vermonters and their families being here, and so we don't. It's the other state needing to accept responsibility.
I'm thinking about somebody who's here and
We
violates our law.
We have utilized, from a mental health perspective, the interstate compact. I'll say in my time at the department, though, we've probably been successful once. And that's typically due to somebody's ready for discharge before a bed's available at the other hospital. And then another would be that maybe somebody's court status changed on the Vermont end that didn't allow for the transfer to happen. Because the charges also need to be resolved.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
No, it's okay. Thank you. Comments, questions, hodgepodge. First, Susan, thank you. You came last year as well, and I always appreciate what you have to say. So important for us to hear a variety of voices, and I really, really appreciate that. And I love the way you set the table for us. That's so important also. There is a context here, and that's great. So I wanted to just, express my gratitude. Also, a few other things that I was thinking about as you were speaking, and one that I'm really glad you brought up was Woodside, because that's been in the back of my mind since we started this conversation. And maybe it's outlined in the bill, I'm not really sure, but whatever we do, and if we do decide to go down this route, I think the oversight piece is going to be huge and very, very important. And I just hope we can make sure that that's laid out as clearly as possible. I was also wondering, and you can answer that if you would like, but if you had a role in the working group, were you part of that?
Yes, thank you for asking. Yes, so I was part of the working group. My organization was, and I'm wearing my Ruth Bader Ginsburg Descent jewelry today because there was a majority opinion in the working group, and then there was a minority opinion. And Senator Weeks, I really appreciated your question about, so we're hearing from all people. So
Williams.
It's
okay.
We always use them.
I appreciate your answer.
Rutland, though, right?
I'm sorry.
Rutland, you got it.
We're brothers.
Rutland. Okay, that gets me done. Okay. I really appreciated your question about, you've heard from everyone in support, who else, did anyone oppose this? And so I really appreciate the invitation to come in, because yes, we did oppose the majority view, but we weren't alone. And so I would encourage you to hear, I saw that Susan Garcia-Nalfi from Legal Aid was there and they opposed, and Green Mountain Self Advocates also opposed, and I would encourage you to hear from Max Barrows or whoever to speak on behalf of them. I also want to say, as for the working group, some things that did not happen. You're going to get a presentation on some remaining questions, but I have requested a tour of the facility. So I think this information that, there's 4 beds on one side and 5 on the other, as someone who spent a lot of time in these institutions, familiar with the treatment milieu, I would have liked to have seen the facility, and I think the working group would have benefited from seeing the facility. That request was made to General Barber and denied. So I think that in terms of AHS and transparency and oversight, more needs to be done. The working group also wanted to hear from someone who was under Act 248 jurisdiction. We never did. Not a person, not a family member.
So
I heard that
my understanding of that, and we have to ask Stuart Schuer this question, but that it's difficult to get someone to give that testimony and provide it. And Stuart, I'm looking at you. I want to be very clear about that, because I think the working group for me was a very, very well carried out group and process with meetings nearly every week. So, and everyone's voice was heard. So that, I think, and I think you and I agree on that completely.
Absolutely.
But the getting someone in who's under Act 248, and Stuart, did you want to comment on that from Dale's perspective?
I was just gonna say, not for the working group, but I would encourage you guys to, if it's possible for you to hear from someone with that
We
experience.
can do that.
I know they tried.
It's difficult. If you can get us someone,
I
we'll do
know,
it.
I think that family member, if they knew that they could come and talk to a committee about their experience, that might be more intriguing than talking to a.
So, and our interest is the one person, not the 2028. Seriously, at this point, but we will go back to the 28.
But those 28 could end up there. So our system is so unstable right now. We have people entitled to shared living providers living in hotels. Any of those 28 could end up in those beds once the gate is open.
Sure.
That's my.
Yeah, no, that's.
And there's not a place to transition out to step down.
Services
We
are
give
so
Patrick
critical.
more beds.
We get it. That's been a quick question from the get-go. But I think this is good. This is a healthy conversation, and we very much appreciate the role that you've been playing in this and the information that you bring us. And that's why you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for your
question. Kristen, if you want to add anything or.
No, I think Susan's done an excellent job laying out.
For the record.
For the record, I'm Kirsten Murphy. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council. We cover a lot of issues, so we have staff to help us with that. And I think Susan's laid out our concerns, both particular and then those broader concerns about the system, which we're trying to solve a systems issue here, but I think there are other solutions to that.
Yeah, we hear that loud and clear. Having additional facilities in communities and additional services is very important. We've heard
Our
this about.
agencies say they could do a lot with $1.2 million a year,
Yeah,
which is what roughly we want to spend on one of these apps.
And we hear that from mental health folks as well. Yeah, we're under duress.
1 point something million per bed or 1 point something million per year? For all the beds?
Per year.
Per year.
Per bed.
Per bed, per year.
If I may, could I introduce myself? I was referenced in Susan's testimony, so I just, in case it was confusing.
Sure, we'll state your name for the record.
I'm Lindsay Owen, I'm the Executive Director at Disability Rights Vermont.
Excellent. Do you want to come up into the chair, or do you want?
I'm not, I will come up very, very briefly. So I am Lindsay Owen again, Disability Rights Vermont. We are the protection advocacy agency for the state of Vermont, and we are federally mandated to go into all the different facilities and treatment settings and monitor for abuse and serious rights violations and neglect. I agree wholeheartedly with what Susan had to say during her testimony, and the need for really trying to do this in the community and focusing on community-based services. Maybe that means changing some laws so we can have additional safeguards in place for folks who might pose a greater risk. It's $3,600 a day per bed. I know this is an appropriation, so that's $11 million a year, because we're talking about one person, but making 9 beds available. And so you're gonna have staff available to serve that group. It's not like you can just have somebody on call and if somebody else comes in. So you're gonna need $11 million a year for this population, where there might be, as Stuart said, one person, maybe, and he even said maybe 0 people. So I think we have to be really cautious about creating this facility and dumping resources into more institutions and not addressing the bigger problem of being proactive and having community-based resources and services in place. So, and I welcome an invitation to testify more, and I can prepare something.
Sure, we'll do that. That'd be great, thank you. Question?
There's like so many questions, it's like sort of
Well, so
right
here's.
and almost on.
Yeah.
I guess, Stuart started to answer the question about the testimony and then also the tour of the facility. And I still am, I mean, what about I guess you're the right person to ask.
Sure.
What if we just had a 5-person facility for people with, mental health, incompetency? And wouldn't that be better than what we have now? And I hear that this is like a systematic problem, but we need to do something. So, I also am really concerned about staff safety and oversight. I mean, I completely agree with Senator Gulick. So if this were to be created, would your staff run it, or how would you?
Yes.
And what would the oversight mechanism be?
So how we have thought about it, because if it moves forward at VPCH, there are factors to consider because the other 16 beds are hospital level of care. And so nothing that we can do to the 9 beds can impact the hospital side and the persons being served there. And their access to programming, yard space and such. So it would be all DMH staff serving, folks across the facility. We would consult with our partners at Dale, for, any necessary, like treatment plan interventions that staff would use. We'd also need to, train staff. Because it is we're proposing a lower level of care than the hospital. Making sure that we're able to clinically serve folks who have a variety of complex needs. Although they're very similar, there's still, someone who, may have autism, doesn't necessarily typically get services from an inpatient hospitalization psychiatrist.
Right, so my question is, if we separated them and we just focused on your population, your people.
Yeah.
Would that be easier and cheaper, and could we do that faster so that we could fix one problem and then have this other issue that maybe we try to address with more community-based care or different model?
So we pay for those beds regardless of who's in them. They are currently funded from a general fund perspective. The $3,400 a day price tag to that is there regardless of it's being used as a hospital bed or a therapeutic community residence bed. So from that cost sits there regardless. For individuals under the care and custody of, of DMH, we do have River Valley Therapeutic Residence. There are some limitations to the type of folks who can go there. I shouldn't have said type of folks, symptoms and complexities that an individual may need when they step down from a hospital. And that limitation is no hands-on. There's not an ability to do medication if needed involuntarily. And so there would still need to be, there's still costs and process associated with that. We do have that system of care that could serve folks, but as the Agency of Human Services is looking at everyone who's receiving services from the agency, this came up because we don't want folks sitting in corrections. So the short answer is yes. For SNOOPs, it's going to be cheaper to serve a smaller group of people, but we're also already paying for those beds.
Senator Gulick has a question.
And then
Senator
I'm
Reed.
tacking on to Senator Hardy's question, which I think is a question of scale, and I'll just ask it bluntly. Is the 9-bed facility too big? Is it too many beds?
Oh boy, I love the bed conversation because man,
Can we go back to some decisions that have been
it's
made?
hard, it's hard to know really.
Right.
And that's the bed conversation across all of healthcare. How many beds is too many? You want beds available when folks need it. Sometimes there's one person in the system and sometimes there's 9 folks in the system that need it. And depending on how long the transition back out to the community looks, that impacts that availability. That's a very big answer to I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't anticipate it being bigger than 9 beds at this point. And I think that's because of the thoughtful approach to limiting, folks who would need access to that level of care.
And if,
Senator Reed
oh,
has a
sorry.
question.
So kind of going down the same line of question, which is very good, it's appropriate. The flip side is, what are the secondary uses for this facility when it's not occupied?
That was gonna be my question, thank you.
Yeah. So currently, the Vermont Psychiatric Care Hospital is operating under a waiver, because it is an institute of mental disease, which means it's a standalone psychiatric hospital. There is a federal limit on institute of mental disease, and that federal limit is 16 beds. So we're able to operate at 25 beds as long as we're titrating down to 16 beds by 2027. And that titration looks like general fund supplementing the Medicaid, Medicare dollars over the course of time. So in 2027, according to Act 79, that facility will need to be a 16-bed hospital facility. I'd like to keep some way to utilize the entire space if we can, that meets our federal requirements for Medicaid, Medicare, but also serves populations that need that treatment.
So that's why you got to the 9 beds, because and we probably talked about this last year and I completely forgot because it's been a year. So it's really just a facility thing has driven us to the 9 bed, not necessarily the population need.
Yes and no.
So even if we use 5 beds for mental health, you know, there would still be the 4 beds to go. What do you do with those 4 beds?
Our goal would be that it turns into one unit.
Right now, that makes sense to me now, but it still doesn't solve the other problem of whether or not this is appropriate to mix the 2 populations.
Exactly, and it still does beg the question where folks with intellectual disabilities go, and this.
Right.
So if services can be provided, and if folks can be restored to competency, and if folks can find a residential facility in the community, those are all the ifs behind the treatment process that should be going on if someone with an intellectual disability is in that facility.
Right. And one quick further question for the commissioner. So the facility is under your jurisdiction, yes? So is it possible for us to get a tour of it if we have?
Oh, we just talked about that before you came in.
It would be really helpful to visualize it.
Yes, absolutely. We are working on a tour for the committee.
Okay.
There are challenges with bringing large groups of tours into a facility where people are actively engaging in treatment. And we don't want to impact folks day to day because of that, which was part of the conversation related to the larger council work and tours related to that. But yes, we have discussed a tour of both River Valley Therapeutic Residence, which, as Karen Barber highlighted initially, is a secure facility that was that came online last year. So we can do a tour there as well as the Vermont Psychiatric.
We're gonna have fun that day. I mean, it will be a good.
Where are the 2?
Sure.
Which
River Valley is in Essex.
It's not in a flood zone, is it?
It is
No,
not
it's
in a
above.
flood zone.
It's above
River Valley sounds really kind of sketchy.
It's above the flood. It's above the flood.
And I get the flood.
Yeah.
It is in the same site that the former Woodside building was.
Okay.
That building was demolished, except for the gym, and was built up for a replacement facility. So it's in Essex, across the street from St. Mike's, I think is what's across the street from.
And VPCH
is on the hill next to Central Vermont Medical Center here in Berlin.
Oh, and okay, I should know that. Do you mind if I ask another question?
Go ahead.
Maybe you've already given this to us
minutes.
last year, but do we have I think I've seen the River Valley one, but site plans, so that maybe even if we can't visit, we have sort of a
Yes.
visual.
We are working, with that with our partners at BGS now, so we'll
Okay.
be able to provide that soon.
Okay.
So we are gonna schedule a visit, our field trip, you know, we love field trips in this committee,
We can try to be more
And-
contained.
and we're going to, you know, one cat at home, I don't know. Anyway, we'll schedule that. I've been talking with the commissioner about doing that with River Valley and make a combination day with, Central Vermont, so we'll do that. And so what I'm gonna suggest now is that Jack McCullough had indicated that he would, had nothing to add today, and Jack, thank you for being a live stream regardless. And what I'd like to do, and Katie is going to bring us up to date on some language that was discussed in House Judiciary. I'm going to suggest that at this point, we take a break for until 10 of, and then come back and look at the language with Katie. And then Commissioner Hawes might have some information for us on competency restoration, so if we can fill out some of that.
I think it's next Thursday.
You gonna do that next Thursday? I'm happy to have you do it next Thursday.
Okay, me too.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, we can do that. And then we have another bill in front of us, but we'll take some time with Katie on S-192 and the language that's over from Judiciary.
Is there there is a new draft of 192
Well,
or
this
not?
is language that Katie is gonna present to us that the House Judiciary was working on, so we'll be doing two things at once.
Hi, Katie.
So Katie, we're gonna take a little bit of a break. Is that okay?
I
with you?
heard, yep.
Okay.